Every culture has its monsters. In early America, they weren't hiding in forests or lurking under beds. They were in the doctor's office, behind polished wooden desks, dressed in fine coats, and armed with scalpels and glass vials. Men who called themselves physicians practiced a kind of medicine that was closer to torture than healing. And the most terrifying part? They believed they were saving lives. To understand just how disturbing medicine was in colonial and early America, you have to forget everything you know about doctors today. There were no stethoscopes, no antibiotics, no concept of germs. Instead, American doctors inherited an ancient system of healing from Europe that was already thousands of years old, the theory of the four humors. According to this idea, the body was balanced between four fluids: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Illness, they believed, was caused not by bacteria or viruses, but by an imbalance of these mysterious fluids. If you were sick, it meant your body was overflowing with one humor and needed to be drained, purged, or burned out. The cure wasn't gentle. It was violent. By far the most common treatment in early America was bloodletting, and it was exactly what it sounds like. Physicians used sharp knives, spring-loaded lancets, or glass cups heated with fire to slice open veins and drain pints of blood from the body. The theory was simple. If you had a fever, your blood was too hot. If you had a headache, blood was pooling in your brain. If your stomach hurt, blood was stagnant in your gut. Whatever the problem, the solution was the same: let it out. Some patients lost a cup of blood, others lost quarts, and the results were devastating. Weakness, dizziness, and death were common outcomes. The most famous victim was none other than the first president of the United States, George Washington. In December 1799, Washington caught a throat infection after riding through icy rain. His doctors rushed to his bedside with the latest treatments. They bled him once. He grew weaker. They bled him again. He collapsed further. By the end of the night, Washington had been drained of nearly 5 pints of blood, almost half the blood in his body. The next morning, he was dead. Doctors called it heroic medicine. But it wasn't heroic. It was a slow, clinical execution. And Washington wasn't alone. From farm wives in New England to enslaved men in Virginia, bloodletting was the universal cure. Children with fevers, pregnant women with nausea, soldiers with battlefield wounds, all were strapped down and drained like livestock at slaughter. If knives seemed too crude, physicians turned to another horror: leeches. Doctors would attach dozens of slimy, writhing creatures to the skin, letting them suck until they were swollen with blood. Some physicians claimed leeches were more scientific because they extracted the right amount without killing the patient outright. But leeches were anything but safe. They carried diseases, often crawled inside patients' mouths or throats, and sometimes refused to detach, leading to infections and bleeding that couldn't be stopped. In wealthy American households, it wasn't unusual to see leeches kept in glass jars, ready for the next fainting spell or fever. Physicians even shipped them across the Atlantic by the thousands, making them one of the most expensive medical imports of the 18th century. Imagine being a child in early America. You wake up sick, your head burning with fever, your stomach cramping. Instead of soup or medicine, your parents call for the doctor. He arrives, opens his case, and inside are not pills or syringes, but wriggling black worms eager to sink their teeth into your skin. If draining blood didn't work, American doctors reached for something even deadlier: mercury. Mercury was one of the most widely prescribed drugs of the 18th and 19th centuries. It was given in pills, rubbed into the skin as an ointment, and even used in vapor baths where patients were shut inside boxes while mercury fumes were pumped in around them. Why? Because mercury was thought to purge the body. It caused vomiting, diarrhea, and profuse sweating. To physicians, this was proof the drug was working expelling disease from the system. In reality, it was poisoning patients from the inside out. Mercury destroyed the nervous system. It caused trembling, tooth loss, bleeding gums, organ failure, and insanity. In fact, the phrase "mad as a hatter" comes from mercury poisoning, since hat makers used mercury to cure felt and slowly went insane from exposure. One of the most disturbing uses of mercury was in treating syphilis. Physicians applied it directly to sores, injected it into muscles, and rubbed it into skin until patients developed mouth ulcers and teeth that fell out. Some patients died of syphilis. Many more died of the cure. Even America's soldiers weren't safe. During the Revolutionary War, the Continental Army's medical supply kits contained massive amounts of mercury compounds. Doctors gave them to soldiers for everything from dysentery to typhoid. Diarrhea, tremors, madness. These weren't symptoms of disease. They were symptoms of medicine. Early American medicine wasn't just about draining or poisoning. It was also about inflicting controlled injury on the body. Doctors believed that illness could be pulled out through the skin. To achieve this, they used blistering agent substances like cantharidin, derived from crushed blister beetles. Applied to the skin, these caused massive, painful blisters that doctors then drained with knives. Patients screamed as their skin bubbled and peeled away, but doctors insisted it was necessary. Counter-irritation, they called it, the idea that one wound could distract the body from another. Vomiting and purging were equally common. Physicians dosed patients with powerful laxatives and emetics until they were doubled over in pain, retching and soiling themselves. Families often described sick rooms filled with the stench of vomit and feces, the patient collapsing on the floor while the doctor calmly declared the treatment a success. The most chilling part of early American medicine is how ordinary it all seemed. Families expected to be bled. Children expected to vomit. Patients expected to suffer. Pain was considered part of the cure. In fact, the more violent the treatment, the more convinced people were that it must be working. A gentle cure couldn't possibly defeat serious illness. Only the most extreme measures, bleeding, poisoning, blistering, were thought to save lives. But in reality, these practices killed countless Americans. Statistics are hard to find, but some historians estimate that more people died from medical treatment in the 18th century than from the diseases themselves. Medicine wasn't science. It was ritualized suffering. And in the dark sick rooms of early America, where patients begged for relief and doctors calmly opened their kits of knives and leeches, the line between healer and executioner blurred beyond recognition. If bloodletting and mercury were terrifying, surgery in early America was something far worse. There were no sterile gloves, no disinfected instruments, no anesthesia beyond a shot of rum or a bullet to bite down on. A patient went to the surgeon knowing they were about to experience the most agonizing pain of their life, and that survival was a coin toss. Yet when the choice was death from infection or death from surgery, many chose the knife. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, surgeons were often regarded not as healers, but as butchers. Their tools weren't much different from a carpenter's: saws, chisels, hammers, and knives. They carried them in leather rolls, sometimes still stained with the blood of the last patient. There was no understanding of bacteria or infection. Surgeons didn't wash their hands between operations, and their aprons were stiff with dried blood, a badge of honor, proof of experience. Operations were performed in private homes, taverns, or makeshift military tents. The operating table might be a kitchen table. The audience was often a crowd of students, neighbors, or curious onlookers, eager to see the spectacle of flesh being cut. And the patient? They were strapped down or held by strong men, thrashing and screaming while the surgeon worked quickly, because speed was the only mercy available. Amputations were the most common surgery in early America, especially on the battlefield. A musket ball or cannon shot could shatter bone beyond repair, An infection was almost certain. The surgeon's solution was simple. Cut it off. The patient would be given a drink of whiskey, and maybe opium if it was available. Then, with assistants pinning the patient down, the surgeon would take out his saw. First, he cut through the skin and muscle with a sharp knife. Then came the sawing of the bone. Asylum survivors never forgot the harsh rasp of steel through living bone mixed with the screams of the patient. If the surgeon was skilled, the whole procedure might take 2 to 3 minutes. Some could do it in less than 60 seconds, but the aftermath was gruesome. Infection was almost guaranteed. Gangrene set in quickly, and without antibiotics, many patients died within days. Those who survived were left permanently maimed, often with crude wooden prosthetics. During the Revolutionary War, estimates suggest that thousands of soldiers lost limbs in this way. The ground outside field hospitals was sometimes littered with severed arms and legs, piled like firewood. If amputation was horrifying, cranial surgery was worse. One of the oldest and most disturbing procedures still practiced in early America was trepanation, drilling a hole into the skull. Physicians believed that head injuries, seizures, or madness could be treated by releasing bad humors trapped in the brain. Using a hand-cranked drill, they bored into the skull, exposing the brain beneath. The operation was done without anesthesia, and survival rates were slim. Many patients bled to death, died of shock, or succumbed to infection. Yet, astonishingly, some did survive. Skulls from colonial graveyards show clear signs of healed trepanation holes. These survivors lived on, forever marked by the crude circle carved into their bone. Imagine lying on a table, wide awake, while a surgeon leaned over you with a drill not to relieve pressure as in modern neurosurgery, but to let evil vapors escape your skull. For women in early America, the most dangerous medical experience wasn't surgery or war. It was childbirth. There were no hospitals, no sterile instruments, no trained obstetricians outside a few major cities. Most births were attended by midwives, who relied on traditional knowledge but had little power when complications arose. If labor stalled, physicians might be called in, and their tools were terrifying. The most infamous were obstetric forceps-long, curved metal clamps used to grip the baby's head and pull it out. In the wrong hands, they crushed skulls, tore mothers apart, and left both scarred for life. Caesarean sections were almost always fatal. Without anesthesia or antiseptics, cutting open the womb was a death sentence. A mother might survive long enough to deliver the child, but infection soon claimed her. The maternal mortality rate was staggering. In some areas, 1 in 8 women died from childbirth complications. Families often expected that at least 1 or 2 pregnancies in a household would end in the mother's death. And when women did survive, they sometimes faced a condition almost as devastating: obstetric fistula. Prolonged labor could tear holes between the birth canal and bladder or rectum, leaving women incontinent and socially ostracized. In the candlelit bedrooms of early America, childbirth was less a celebration of life than a game of chance with death. If surgery and childbirth were brutal, dentistry was pure torment. Toothaches were common in early America thanks to poor diets, lack of hygiene, and limited knowledge of oral health. The cure was usually extraction. Dentists are often just barbers or blacksmiths, used iron forceps to yank teeth out by brute force. There was no anesthesia. Patients were held down, screaming, as teeth were ripped from their jaws. Sometimes the tooth shattered, leaving fragments to fester. False teeth were in high demand, and the trade in human teeth became a gruesome business. Some were pulled from corpses on battlefields. Others were bought from the poor, who sold their own teeth to the wealthy. George Washington himself wore dentures made not of wood, as the myth suggests, but of human teeth likely taken from enslaved people. Mouth infections after extractions often turned deadly. A simple toothache could spiral into sepsis, killing the patient within weeks. If civilian medicine was grim, battlefield medicine was hell on earth. During the Revolutionary War, and later the War of 1812, field hospitals were little more than tents filled with the stench of blood, feces, and rotting flesh. Amputated limbs piled outside. Flies swarmed over open wounds. Soldiers lay in rows on straw mats, moaning in agony, waiting for their turn under the knife. Surgeons worked endlessly, their hands slick with blood, their tools dull from overuse. There was no time to clean between patients. Infections spread like wildfire. Typhus, dysentery, and gangrene killed more men than bullets ever did. In fact, historians estimate that for every soldier killed in battle, at least 2 died from disease or medical treatment. The irony was bitter. Men survived the cannon fire of battle, only to be destroyed by the saw of the surgeon. Perhaps the darkest fact of all is that anesthesia didn't exist in early America. Ether and chloroform wouldn't be widely used until the mid-19th century. For most of the colonial and early national period, patients had only 3 options: alcohol, opium, or nothing at all. Whiskey dulled the pain but never erased it. Opium could numb, but was rarely available in large amounts. For most patients, surgery meant full consciousness. Survivors described it as the most excruciating experience imaginable. The searing agony of knives cutting, the grinding of bone saws, a fire of cauterization. Some fainted from shock. Many never recovered, their minds scarred long after their bodies healed. Doctors prided themselves on speed, because the faster the cut, the less time the patient had to suffer. But speed meant mistakes. Arteries were missed, bones splintered, lives lost. Surgery wasn't healing. It was legalized butchery. What makes all of this even more disturbing is how normalized it was. Families didn't see surgery as salvation, but as a last resort to avoid certain death. Women expected childbirth to bring pain or death. Soldiers went to war, knowing that if the musket ball didn't kill them, the surgeon saw might. There was no comfort, no anesthesia, no antiseptic, just raw pain and the slim hope of survival. To live in early America was to live in a world where medicine hurt as much as disease, where the cure was often worse than the sickness, and where every visit to the doctor might be your last. If surgery and childbirth showed the brutality of the body, then early American treatments for the mind reveal the cruelty of the spirit. The history of mental health care in America is not one of healing. It is one of confinement, abuse, and despair. And when not locked away in grim institutions, patients were often poisoned by miracle cures, sold by traveling doctors, snake oil salesmen, and drug companies with no regulation. This was the other half of early American medicine, not the saws and scalpels of the surgeon, but the potions, cages, and chains of those who claimed to heal the mind. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, mental illness was barely understood. Patients were often called lunatics, thought to be cursed by God, possessed by demons, or driven mad by bad blood. The solution? Remove them from society. Thus began the rise of the American asylum. These institutions were not designed for healing. They were warehouses for human suffering. The goal was to hide the insane from public view, not to help them recover. Patients were often chained to walls or locked in iron cages. Some were kept in dark, windowless cells for weeks or months. Others were restrained in tranquilizer chairs, wooden contraptions that immobilized the entire body, sometimes for days at a time. There were ice baths intended to shock the madness out, spinning chairs that whirled patients until they vomited and fainted, forced blistering, bleeding, and purging to balance the humors. To the public, asylums were symbols of progress. To the patients inside, they were prisons of torment. In the mid-1800s, a woman named Dorothea Dix campaigned for reform, horrified by the conditions she witnessed. She exposed stories of men and women left naked, chained in filth, or beaten by their keepers. Her efforts led to the creation of more state-run asylums, with the promise of more humane treatment. But in practice, little changed. The new asylums still relied on confinement, restraints, and experimental treatments. The methods may have shifted from chains to moral therapy, but the reality remained bleak. Overcrowded wards, underpaid staff, and patients subjected to terrifying cures that rarely worked. By the late 19th century, American asylums held tens of thousands, many never to be released. Some entered for depression or grief, only to spend the rest of their lives locked away. Outside the asylum walls, another menace stalked early Americans: quack doctors. These men traveled from town to town in brightly painted wagons, selling miracle tonics and elixirs. They promised to cure everything from headaches to cancer, from impotence to madness. Their advertisements filled newspapers with bold claims: restores youth, heals all disease, a miracle in a bottle. But what did these medicines contain? Opium, morphine, cocaine, alcohol, mercury, even arsenic. One of the most popular was laudanum, a tincture of opium and alcohol. It was sold freely, even to mothers to calm crying babies. Another was coca wine, which mixed cocaine with red wine, marketed as a cure for exhaustion. Patent medicines made addicts out of entire families. They masked symptoms but poisoned the body. Yet with no regulation and no FDA, they spread unchecked across America. One of the most infamous examples was Lydia Pinkham's vegetable compound, marketed to women for menstrual and menopausal issues. Advertisements showed her smiling face, promising relief and vitality. What women didn't know was that the formula contained a high percentage of alcohol. At a time when women were discouraged from drinking openly, the tonic gave them a secret socially acceptable way to consume liquor daily. For some, it became a silent addiction disguised as medicine. The phrase snake oil salesman comes from this era. Some peddlers literally sold bottles labeled snake oil, claiming it cured pain, fever, and inflammation. In truth, most of it was mineral oil, alcohol, and coloring. These men put on elaborate shows, hiring actors to pretend to be healed on stage. They played music, told jokes, and whipped crowds into a frenzy, then sold bottles by the hundreds. By the time anyone realized they'd been scammed, the salesman's wagon was long gone, rolling toward the next unsuspecting town. In the late 1800s, drug companies began selling refined narcotics as miracle cures. Cocaine was marketed as a remedy for toothaches and depression. Heroin, invented by Bayer, was advertised as a non-addictive substitute for morphine. Even Coca-Cola, in its original form, contained cocaine. It was advertised as a brain tonic and an energy booster, safe for children and adults alike. Addiction spread like wildfire. Entire families unknowingly became dependent on these substances, thinking they were taking medicine. Babies were given soothing syrups laced with morphine. Housewives took tonics that left them shaking with withdrawal. Veterans of the Civil War returned with morphine addictions that haunted them for life. This was the hidden epidemic of early America. Drug dependence sold in pretty bottles. By the mid-19th century, medicine embraced a new obsession: electricity. Doctors believed that electrical currents could cure paralysis, depression, or even insanity. Patients were strapped to crude devices and shocked, sometimes until they lost consciousness. There was no understanding of dosage or safety. Some patients improved temporarily, others were scarred or burned, and many were simply traumatized. Though electrotherapy would eventually evolve into modern treatments, in early America, it was little more than another cruel experiment on desperate patients. What unites all of these disturbing practices is a deep cultural belief that suffering was necessary for healing. Whether it was bleeding a patient until they fainted, locking them in an asylum cell, or shocking them with electricity, early American medicine equated pain with progress. If it hurt, it must be working. Patients often accepted this logic too. They endured agony at the hands of doctors and quacks alike, hoping the torment might mean survival. In reality, it often meant the opposite. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the horrors of early American medicine began to spark reform. The Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 finally cracked down on patent medicines, requiring labels and banning the worst poisons. Medical schools standardized training, replacing folk remedies with science. Asylums slowly shifted toward modern psychiatric care, though abuses lingered. Surgery advanced with anesthesia and antiseptics, turning butchery into true medicine. But the scars of the past remained. Generations had been bled, blistered, chained, and drugged in the name of healing. And the legacy of quack medicine still haunts America today, in the endless promises of miracle cures and the shadow of the opioid crisis. The story of early American medicine is not one of triumph, but of horror. It reveals a world where patients were experiments, where doctors were both saviors and killers, and where the line between cure and poison blurred into nightmare. From the sawdust floors of battlefield hospitals to the locked wards of asylums, from the bottles of snake oil to the cocaine-laced syrups sold to mothers, medicine in early America was less about healing than survival. It is a reminder of how far we've come and how fragile progress can be. For in the shadows of history, the most disturbing truth is this: medicine was once as dangerous as the diseases it tried to cure.